glad you're all here either this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. We thank you for taking the time out. This session today is to introduce something new that is coming from GPSL. So we'll just jump right into it then. Let's get the PowerPoint to move. There you go. So my name is Jeff Stevenson. I've been with GPSL for 12 years. I'm currently the Chief Experience Officer here. If you aren't sure what a Chief Experience Officer is or does, I'd be happy to explain it to you. Just schedule a follow-on for after this session. I'm also joined by Jake Memory, our product manager for our new product called Xignal S1000D. So Jake, welcome. Thank you to have you here as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
So let's go ahead and jump into things here. So what we're trying to do is we have something new to talk to you about today that is to address sort of a problem that we've observed. So GPSL has had a history of working with S1000D and various clients over the years, and we've identified a bit of a gap in the market. Something we've noticed, our customers and their suppliers are having to overcome. And it really is about how does a prime OEM or a prime contractor really work with their suppliers, mostly in the context of technical documentation. And any of you here who are part of the aerospace and defense industry, and I would imagine that most of you are, know what S1000D is, or you've heard of it. You use it in anger, or you use it, as you need to, right? But how is that documentation getting communicated back to the prime OEM? If you're a supplier, if you're a prime OEM, how are you getting that documentation from your suppliers? It's often a very disconnected process. Not much change management is in place. Various ways that file is getting exchanged between companies. And you can see here in the last bullet point, it even happens over CDs, which I don't know, my computer doesn't even have a CD player in it anymore. So I'm not sure who's doing that, but you can believe it still happens. So, so from a supplier point of view, though, if you're working with a prime OEM, perhaps it's your first time, into that type of a contract, maybe you've been doing it for a long time. You may have been asked to supply documentation, and you may have been asked, to give it in a specific way. Maybe not. Maybe you've been supplying it in something very simple like Word for a long time, or FrameMaker. But now you're being asked to say, well, I want this documentation in a specific format. That format might be S1000D. You don't know S1000D. You don't have a solution in place, and you may only have one contract that would need S1000D, or perhaps you have multiple contracts, but you only have to get in there and use it every so often. It's not a daily thing that you have to do. So it's very hard to justify the cost. Maybe you're a small shop, and maybe having an enterprise software solution is just not sustainable for you. With the server infrastructure, the admin, and those kinds of things, it might be cost prohibitive, or just put a cost burden on that contract and really have a hit to your margins. Again, that makes it inefficient. You're trying to scramble. You're trying to respond to it, but you aren't really sure how to do that. So what if, right? Here's where we start to get into the potential new world here. What if you could overcome these challenges? What if you could have a solution in place that was inexpensive, was easy to use, allows you to take your content, put it into something like S1000D, and to deliver it to your prime contractor? Or if you're a prime contractor, what if you don't have to worry about saying, I need this content in S1000D to your suppliers, and you're going to get back what you asked for, and it's going to be consistent. It's going to be what you need, and you can then fold that into the prime tech manual or into the prime documentation set, right? So what we're going to show you today is how we are going to approach that challenge and how we're going to try and overcome that. So here's where I get to introduce Jake to you. Jake comes to us from experience. He was a user of S1000D for a lot of years, working for contractors and companies that you would have heard of before. And in his frustration and in his sleepless nights, he sat there and thought, how could I do this better? And out of that frustration came the inspiration to write a new software platform that we're calling Xignal S1000D. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jake. And Jake, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and hello to everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. As a bit more of an introduction around Xignal, it's been designed from the ground up, essentially, as an S1000D solution built for the 21st century, with the aim of trying to address and solve some of those challenges within the supply chain that Jeff just touched on. So as we know, S1000D is a complicated specification. I don't think anyone could deny that. And in my 20-ish years working on S1000D within industry, I've experienced pretty much all of those challenges that we've just touched on, such as supplier inexperience of S1000D, getting data supplied correctly and in the right format, and also the lack of experience, the lack of ability to collaborate effectively between companies within the supply chain. So we felt there was room for improvement in terms of how we produce the data, how we could make it maybe simpler to adopt, how the data is reviewed, which is something we're going to look at in a minute, and also the logistics of how that data is exchanged between companies and tiers within the supply chain, and ultimately integrated into the end product data set. So we'll jump into the demo in a sec. This demo is pre-recorded. I am working from home at the moment, and I was a bit concerned about internet bandwidth issues, which I've been having recently. So this one is pre-recorded. I've also got the application fired up here. So after the 20 minutes or so demo, should we want to touch on anything specifically, we can dive back in and have a look. Okay, let's get into it.
Jake, you should be able to take the screen share. There you go.
Okay, so Xignal is a software as a service application, meaning that we can access this from any device and any browser with an internet connection. Each customer, or each tenant as they're called in the SaaS world, has their own unique URL for accessing the application. And in this instance, we'll be logging in using this fictitious, imaginatively titled My Company. So My Company is a supplier within the supply chain, and we've had an S1000D requirement put on us by our customer. So a fairly typical scenario. So it's worth noting as well that each tenancy has the ability to completely customize this with your own branding and logo, etc. So that's a nice touch. Okay, so let's log in. I'm just logging in as me, and I am a super user for My Company. So we've got two-factor authentication enabled by default, which means that we just have to type in a code here, which I'm receiving via text now. Okay. So the first thing we notice when logging into the system is this nice modern user interface, which is pretty unusual for S1000D tools, right? The dashboard is the first thing that we see when logging in, and the dashboard gives us some nice useful statistics to do with the projects within our environment, but more usefully, perhaps arguably, is the user workload overview. So with this widget we can see the authors of the selected project and what they've currently got checked in, checked out, assigned, etc. We've got various widgets here that display this various information to us, and this is very useful from a kind of a sort of resource allocation perspective. So you can immediately see here, using this bar chart, for example, that out of the 5 of us, that I'm fairly overloaded here with various pieces of work, and perhaps we should look at allocating some data modules to some other users. Okay, but back to our scenario. Okay, so we want our customer to be involved in our workflow process. So as a supplier, we're not massively confident with S1000D, and we'd like to involve the customer to approve the modules as we're going. So the first thing we need to do is come down to users and make sure we've got the user configured, or the users configured within the system. So the users page here is literally just a repository of users. We're not actually dictating sort of roles or permissions at this point. This is literally just where we add users to the system. So if I click create new user there, we would just add some fairly standard pieces of information, and when we click save, the system would email the user their credentials for logging in. The only thing we are doing here related to kind of roles and permissions is we're establishing whether the user is a standard user or a super user. So for the most part, standard user. So down here you can see that we've got Mr. Joe Blogs that I've set up, and he will be playing the part of our customer today. So he's from customer XYZ company. Okay, so the next thing we do is go to roles. Let's go to the roles page. And the roles is really what make this system quite unique and quite powerful, in that we have the ability to create an almost infinite number of different roles with different permissions. So roles are essentially just collections of permissions, and it comes with all these standard ones, static ones, but we've got the ability to create as many custom roles as we like. So if I click on the create custom role, I can give a role a name, and I can come down through here through the permissions and start ticking boxes. Now these boxes represent different functions and buttons and menus within the system. So as I say, we can literally we can get down to a very granular level as to what we want a specific role to be able to see or do within the system. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just come back out of here, and you'll see that I've created a customer role already. So if we just drill into the actions here and click edit, we'll see if we go to permissions that we've actually assigned very, very few permissions to the customer role. All we've given them is the ability to approve data modules or reject data modules, and that's it. Okay, and what that essentially does will become apparent when we log in as that user shortly. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is go to projects. If we go to project list, we will see here a list of all the projects within our tenancy. Creating new projects is really simple. We just come up here to create new project, fill in some fairly typical details. We've used as many pickers as we can here to just to simplify things. So if I click pick on language code, for example, I just pick the code and it adds it for me. But the tab that we're particularly interested in here for the purposes of this demo is the workflow tab. So by default we have a two-step review process, a two-step workflow process. The author authors the module, and then once they send it for review, it goes to a reviewer role. They either approve or reject the data module. Okay, but what we want to do, as we've discussed, is we want to allow our customer to be kind of the third step in that review process. So if we click on custom workflow, what that does is present to us all of the roles that are available within the system. And what we would do here is we would say, well, okay, I still want an internal review, but then I also want my customer to review it as well, and then we can order these accordingly. We could of course add as many others as we wanted. It could get a bit silly, I guess, but in this example we just want author, then reviewer, then customer. Okay, I'm going to cancel this because I've already created a project with that configuration. In fact, I can prove that by clicking on this edit button, clicking on workflow, and you'll see here author, reviewer, and customer. This is just telling us that we can't now edit the workflow once the project's underway, so this is kind of locked to us now. However, it does tell us that individual DMs can be selected to bypass the custom workflow as required. So what that means is we may have a situation where we don't want every single module to go through that three-step process. We may have, I don't know, a title page or something that just doesn't warrant going to the customer for their approval, so we can kind of bypass it on an individual data module level. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is allocate users to the project. So as you can see, I've already got a bunch of users allocated. To add new users, we would just click add user, and this is obviously looking at all those users that we saw earlier, and we could click any other users, and then we would allocate them roles by clicking on this button here. So for example, Amanda Memory, if I click on the button there, we can see that she is both author and reviewer. If we look at me, the same, author and reviewer. But if we look at Mr. Joe Blogs, we can see that he has been assigned the customer role. Okay, so let's look at the data modules. So I feel the need to apologise in advance that we have this awful bike data set again. I know everyone's a bit sick and tired of that, but here we are. Okay, so let's just get a little bit familiar with the environment first, or the interface. There are numerous ways in which we can filter this for the user, so we can, the user can filter to see what they want to see. So we can use the status filter here. We could say, okay, I only want to see data modules that are checked out, or I only want to see data modules that are awaiting review. I don't think there are any actually, no. Or assigned, or any other. Okay, so let's reset that filter. I can also click on the assigned to me switch. So obviously what that does is it just gives me a list of anything that's got my name in either the author or reviewer column. Okay, so this is essentially my inbox, I guess you could call that. And there's various other ways we can filter. We've got the SNS over here, so we could start drilling through into the SNS, and we could filter on systems and subsystems, etc. Fairly standard. And we've also got some fairly advanced filtering options here as well, with some of these sort of mathematical operators. And also the Excel filters here. So there's numerous ways in which we can kind of configure this interface to see what we want to see. So in this workflow column here, worth mentioning, we've got the 3 bubbles, so that indicates our 3-step workflow process. So if I hang my mouse over it, we can see author, and then the next phase is reviewer, and the next phase is customer. And these will change colors, and you'll get little ticks in these as we work through that workflow process. So it shows us exactly whereabouts the data module is in that process. So let's just come down here a little bit. Okay, so we can see down here this data module, this repair data module here has got a couple of different icons here. So the 5 indicates that there are 5 graphics within this module. It's also got this little speech mark here that indicates that there is a comment, and there's also an attachment in here. So how do we see those? Well, we can drill into the record here, and we can click on a few tabs through here. So this one just gives us some overall details about the module. We can click on where used, and this would list any data modules that reference this module. We can click on graphics and get a preview of the graphics within the module, and we can explode those. We can click on the history and get a history of what's happened, and this will obviously be populated as the data module goes through its workflow. It will be listed here what's happening with the date and time. We've got comments here, so as you can see, I made a comment here, new graphic required in DM, see source data. And I've also added some source data here, so I've added a PDF for the repair of the bike, and a description and the attachment type. So how do we add comments and attachments? Well, we use the right click item here, and we come down to add, and we've got attachments and comments. So I can add a new attachment, select the category, upload the file and add a description. Okay, and similarly with comments. Okay, so let's edit a module. So the first thing we would need to do, of course, is allocate the module to the author and reviewer or reviewers. So I would right click, assign author, and as you can see, it's already got my name assigned to it. We can add 1 or more users, and similarly if we go to assign reviewer, as we know, we've got this 3-step review process, so we would need the reviewer and we would need a customer. So we've already allocated Joe Bloggs here, and I've allocated me as the reviewer just for simplicity's sake for this demo. So let's check out this module. So as the author, I've got this menu item here. I can click checkout. That changes the status, and then I can right click again and I can go edit DM. This will open the data module in our integrated S1000D authoring environment, and the first thing you will notice when this fires up is that it is very different from most other XML authoring tools, in that you can't see any XML. Believe me, it's there. So this is S1000D, and we're working with the S1000D schema, but for the most part all of the XML is hidden from the user, and we've got this very nice, clean, modern interface to work with. Okay, if we wanted to see what's going on underneath, there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can click on the XML pane here, so this shows us all of the underlying XML. Okay, and if we click around in the document, it updates accordingly. And we've also got the ability up here, if we click on show tags, we can actually see the XML tags, which gives us a slightly more familiar look and feel to a lot of other XML authoring tools, I suppose. Okay, so let's come down here and let's add a step. So adding new steps, we can just simply click enter and that will add our new procedural step. Let's add some text and then we'll add a graphic. Okay, I think that's a sentiment we can all sympathise with. So let's add a graphic. So we would just simply click up on this graphic icon here. We can search for an ICN or a title, or we can just scroll through. So let's just pick that one there, for example. Click insert image and it adds all the required elements and attributes for us. Now what we want to do is obviously assign this figure an ID, so let's go to the attributes pane here, click on the figure breadcrumb, and it's automatically assigned it this ID, but we want something a bit more human readable, a bit more conformant to the norm perhaps. So this is the third graphic, so we'll add a fig 0003, and now we can actually reference this graphic. So all we do to reference is we would click on this link icon. This presents us with all of the internal references that we can link to here. We can also link to other data modules, of course, here as well. So this is obviously querying the CSDB and giving us all of our available data modules within the project. But for us, we want to link to that graphic, so we'll just click on figure. There's our figure 3 that we just added. It's highlighting it in the background there. Click add, and that adds our reference. If we wanted to change that reference, we can just double click it. We could change it for a different figure, for example. We don't want to do that. Okay. Tables can easily be copy and pasted from Word as well. We've got some really nice table editors, or if we wanted to add a warning, for example, we could come up here, add a warning. Okay, warning, this is the bike data set. I think we need a warning for that. Okay, so let's assume as the author we have we finished our work in the data module, so we want to click save. Let's just wait for that to save. Did that save? Let's just double check. Yeah, okay. So now we can close that and we can check it in. Okay, so what we would now do as the author is send it for review. Now what this would do is it obviously sends it to me first, because I've also allocated myself as the first reviewer in this example. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to immediately approve this, okay, and obviously what that does then is send it across to our external customer, Joe. So what that's done now, that's emailed him, Joe, and he will have a notification waiting for him that there is a data module to review. So if I just pull across this other browser window, what we will now do is log in as Joe Blogs. Okay, and we do have the two-factor authentication process to go through a second time here. Okay, so what you'll notice when logging in as Joe Blogs is we don't get the dashboard. If you remember, we didn't give him that permission. We only gave him approve and reject permissions for the customer role. So what he does get, he gets this kind of notification window telling him that a minute ago a module's been authored and waiting his review. You'll also notice he's got a vastly reduced number of menu items here. So if we click on projects, we've only got project list. He's only got one project in there, and within the data modules menu he's only got the data module manager. So if we click on assigned to me, okay, so as we can see, this is the module that we've just authored. It's awaiting review, so we know Joe knows it's awaiting his review. He can now go in as the reviewer, and again, reduced menu items here, review DM. What this is now doing is opening up the same editing environment, but it's opening it in review mode only. So what that means is we cannot do any editing in here, and almost everything is grayed out to us. So what we can do, we can start to review the data module. Okay, now, okay, as the reviewer, this is not a particularly good warning for us, so I could say okay, and then I might say something like okay. Okay, so let's assume as the reviewer we've reviewed that module, and we can save it, wait for it to save. We can close this, and then we can, as the reviewer, we would reject this module. We've now got the opportunity to leave a comment relating to why we're rejecting it. Okay, and that's now rejected. So what we can do now is we can come back to me as Jake within my company, and if I click on assigned to me, we can see that module has been rejected. Okay, and now I can again check it out. Open the DM and have a look at the comments that have been written by the reviewer. Okay, so if I click on the little next button there, that will immediately take me to the first comment, and I can click on the comments tab there. So please remove warning. Yeah, okay, fair comment. Let's just delete that one. And Joe is saying this is a bit strong, please reword. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and that has cleared his comments, so we could save that now. And what we would now do is push that through the same workflow process, check it in, and it would go to the reviewer. Once they approve, it would then go back to the customer. Once the customer approves, it would become issued. Okay, so that is more or less the kind of the process and how we can involve the customer in our workflow process. There's also the ability, of course, on the flip side of that, if we were to use the scenario of, perhaps we're the prime contractor and we are putting the requirement on our suppliers, perhaps we could host this environment and invite our suppliers in to create their content within our environment. So again, that means we can be part of that process. Perhaps we can help them with the SNS, the DMRL, all that kind of stuff, and it becomes a proper collaboration environment, as opposed to people working in those or companies working in those silos. So a really useful kind of a way to collaborate on a project together. Obviously, we've got plenty of other functionality in here as well. Publishing, for example. So if I just switch project for 1 second to this one here, and then come down to publishing, we can see that we've got a publication module builder as well. So if I drag in this publication, this publication module, we can actually we can use a nice interface to start creating publication modules, drag and drop data modules into the publication module, and then we can simply PDF from within the environment as well, which all happens in the background, and lets us know when the PDF's ready. So that is more or less it. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jake. We go ahead, I'll pop the PowerPoint back up here so people have something to look at other than you and I. Right. So, okay, so I do have one question here, and it really is about how is this access? We talked about being sort of up in the cloud, but the question is, what does that mean? So I can start to answer this one, Jake, and you can kind of fill in the lines for me. So by cloud, what we mean is that this really is a SaaS solution, so software as a service, if you don't know what that is. Meaning that the use case we're trying to solve is for companies that maybe don't have the need or the capacity to install another software application. So you're able to sign into this, and you saw from Jake's presentation that everything is web-based, everything comes from the browser. So you don't need to install anything or support a new application. You can just sign in. Everything is up in the cloud, and the application is also run from the cloud and sort of that SaaS environment or in that SaaS architecture. Again, trying to make it lightweight and trying to sort of address the use case of a supplier or someone who doesn't need to get into S1000D very often, or doesn't want to have that sitting on their current server platforms, right? So, Jake, anything to add to that one?
Not really, Jeff. You pretty much nailed it. You know, the typical use case is a supplier that would come to us that, you know, they don't need the burden of installing lots of software, all the support that goes with that. They just want to get up and running, producing S1000D, and you know, this tool just comes into its own in that kind of scenario.
Okay. All right. Next question we have is around security, and as this is a cloud solution or a SaaS solution, how do you ensure the security?
Great question. Yeah, I knew this one would come. You know, since its inception, this product has been, we focused on security as one of the highest priorities. We are more than aware, and certainly I'm more than aware, coming from industry, the sensitive nature of some of the data that we're working with in these systems. Now, there's no kind of really straightforward answer I can give to this, or a one-liner, and I'd love to say, you know, there's this big switch that we can flick in the Azure environment that just locks everything down and makes it impervious to attack. That's not the case. What there is a series of measures that we can take, and a series of things that we can do to try and, you know, to really ensure the data is as secure as it possibly can be, and in many cases far more secure than it would be, you know, on-prem even. So things like, you know, the encryption in transit, encryption at rest, the two-factor authentication, man-in-the-middle attack prevention. There's a whole list of things, you know, preventative measures that we've taken, and we do actually have a data sheet on this as well, specifically on security, because I know how much of a big issue this is. So more than happy to share that, but to go into real detail about this would probably be too technical for this call. But happy to share the data sheet.
Sure. Okay. Other question we have is, what issues of S1000D are currently supported, and what are you planning to support in the future?
Yeah, another great question. So at the moment it's 4.x, so 4.0, 401, 4.1 and 4.2. We are speaking to a customer at the moment who will shortly need 5.0. So that is on the roadmap as well. We're yet to speak to anybody that needs to go kind of back, if you like, to the more, you know, legacy side of things, the 3s or the 2s. That's not to say that would be impossible, because it wouldn't. We could do that, of course. The SGMLs, the really old stuff, that's a bit more technically challenging because we're working with web tools. But, you know, happy to have a discussion and look at some workarounds if that was an absolute requirement. Sure.
And I'm glad you mentioned about the roadmap as well. I also want to add to that. Obviously, we pay attention to the industry. You know, Jake has mentioned, you know, supporting up to issue 5.0, and we know that the older issues are also out there. We also want to, you know, in the spirit of collaboration, also get some of that from our customers as well. And we want to respond to what our customers are asking for too. So we would love to, you know, have conversations. If there's anything specific you're doing with S1000D, we want to talk about that in the context of what your requirements are. Another question is about the publishing side, Jake. So sometimes we have to produce special outputs in different formats. Is that possible?
Different formats as in the way the PDF structure, or different formats as in kind of an IETM or PDF? I guess we're probably referring to PDF at this point, are we?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously the publication module builder gives you the ability to structure the publication in any way, shape or form that you like. And we can also edit that publication module, not just in the interface that you saw, but we can also open that in the editor, which is, you know, as you saw, a nice user-friendly way in which we can play around with some of the text and titles in there as well. So really, it's you know, the possibilities are endless in terms of how you want to structure it, and headings and bookmarks and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. And then a similar question. How, I'm going to paraphrase some of this. How does it work with, this is IETP class 4, you know, S1000D, you know, there are different classes of IETPs, but just in general, Jake, how would this interface with an S1000D IETP viewer?
So it would depend entirely on the builder, or which product of IETM you're using to build your products. If it had some sort of API facility whereby we could link it, no problem, you know, we could look at doing that. Typically, however, the way that it would work is you would do an export of the data from the system, and, you know, that would include data modules, any media, graphics, etc., and the publication module, and then you could feed that directly into into your builder, into your item builder.
Okay. I don't think we have any more questions. So I guess we'll move on to the last thing and kind of close things out. So, for more information about the solution, if you're interested, curious, or want to tell us that we're crazy, feel free to reach out to us. Actually, I think one more question came through last minute. Last question. Sorry, Jake. I almost had you off the hook here. Does it support 3D animation?
Great question. Does it support 3D animation? I suppose from Xignal side, I'm just thinking about the architecture in my head. From Xignal side, yes, there's no reason why it can't. It can support S1000D with all elements, all attributes, all its good stuff. The 3D kind of viewing, I guess, would depend on the builder and viewer at the end, I'm thinking. So that would probably be where the restriction is, as opposed to Xignal.
I'll add to that as well, that the S1000D specification does not have guidance on 3D animation currently. I think the default illustration model in there is still CGMs. So could it support 3D animation? Sure. Is that part of S1000D? Not quite yet. And I think Jake is right. It really depends on what the output type is. If you want to do 3D animations, it really is dependent upon the IATP, and can it support 3D geometry. So I think that does it for today. If you want to get in touch, feel free to do so. We have some contact information up here. Tracy Four is one of our great salespeople, and she'd be happy to speak to you and arrange something further if you want to talk more about it. Otherwise, we thank everybody for joining. Kate, any final words?
No, you've covered everything, I think. So yeah, get in touch with Tracy, or you've obviously all got my details from the original invitation. So reach out if you have any further questions or want anything explaining in more detail, or for Jake to go through any of the features in more detail. Yeah, great. Thanks, guys.
All right,
very good. Much all.
Thanks all.